Hey everyone, it's your friend and colleague Jesse Green, and you're listening to another episode of the Savvy Netters podcast. Now, in our episode last week, we spoke about my time in the Navy and the things I learned about being on a warship. And in particular, I was talking about how every person on the warship has a very important role. And similarly, every person on your team has a very important role. We unpacked a few things around how to get the best out of people. But what I want to shift gear to today is understanding culture, because you can have the best people on the crew, you can have the best people on your team, and still things don't work out. And we think it's a system thing, we think it's a people thing, but oftentimes it's an environment thing, and that's culture. One of my favorite metaphors involves gardening. I come from a family of gardeners. For some reason or another, they all love it. I'm not so good at it, but I've learned enough about gardening to understand the value of soil. When I was younger, I'd often be dragged out of the house to do something with my mother or my father out in the garden, and I'd be getting my fingers into the dirt. And my mother would be constantly asking me to turn the soil over, to add more nutrients to the soil, to add more mulch, whatever it is we were doing to prepare the soil prior to planting. And the thing that happens in a dental practice is oftentimes we don't create the right environment for growth, because if you get the soil right in a garden, your plants will grow, your garden will grow spectacularly. And if we take that same lesson to a team, if we spend time getting the culture right, the values right, the accepted behaviors within the practice right, and documented and adhered to, then ultimately we're creating the best environment for our seeds, our team, to really grow and to thrive. When I was in Bali some years ago, I mentioned last week I met a restaurateur, and she spoke about the most important role in her business being the dishwasher, because it was where choke points occurred. But in that same presentation, she also spoke about how she grew her ingredients. She was known for having organic ingredients. She was known for having the best produce that Bali could find and produce. And she had the best chefs working with that great produce. But as she said, the best chefs can't create world-class dishes without great produce. And you don't get great produce unless you control the soil in which it's grown. So she spent a disproportionate amount of time working on the soil in her veggie garden so that her produce was world-class and so that her chefs could work with world-class ingredients to produce world-class meals. It's the same concept that we want to adopt in your practice. So what does creating a great culture look like? Well, culture is not just one thing. There's lots of facets to culture. So let me unpack a few of them really quickly. At the heart of your culture are your core values. Your core values are your North Star in your practice. It's about who you are as an individual, who you are as a team, the things that you hold dear, the standards you want to adhere to. And of course, when you start thinking about your core values, we need to understand what are the habits and the behaviors that support your core values, and then what are the habits and the behaviors that actually undermine your core values. And we need to talk about those both equally. We want to have the opportunity to outline these are the sorts of behaviors we want to see, these are the sorts of behaviors we don't want to see, because they either align or don't align with our core values, and equally our vision and mission for the practice. So discussing that culture up front and planning for that is going to be really key. The key thing to understand is if you grow the soil first, if you create the culture, the people will thrive. What most people do is they don't spend time creating the culture or growing the soil, and when things don't work out, they blame the people rather than the environment that you placed them in. So one of your jobs as leaders is to make sure that you maintain the culture, and that means having a couple of key leadership conversations in your toolkit. The three key leadership conversations that you need to be able to have is, firstly, one, to be able to give someone genuine praise, a real pat on the back, if you will. To be able to give specific praise that's meaningful and impactful encourages that behavior to be repeated over and over and over, because we know behavior rewarded is behavior repeated, right? The second conversation that leaders need to equip themselves with is the ability to very nicely reprimand someone. So some people call that a difficult conversation. I don't like that language because it doesn't need to be difficult. So I prefer to call it a necessary conversation. And this is more of a slap on the wrist. And the third conversation that I hope you don't need to use that often, but sometimes you do, is the ability to let someone go gracefully and with dignity from the practice, the ability to release someone for other opportunities. So these are core leadership conversations that you as the leader need to be able to have confidently within your practice in order to maintain the best environment for the people who do stay in the practice. Now, there's a couple of things to having conversations. There's a few keys to having great conversations. I want to outline them for you because I think most people go into conversations willy-nilly and they're not intentional with their language, and therefore they get haphazard results. Sometimes it lands really well, but more often than not, it's a bit of a train wreck. So when you're having conversations, there's a few key considerations. The first thing is to be really clear. What's your objective for this conversation? What are you trying to achieve by having this conversation? Most people I know are very, I suppose, unintentional with their words. They're not deliberate. And so words can be used in a willy-nilly fashion and create willy-nilly results. It's not intentional enough. So that's key number one. Key number two is to have a structure to follow. And I love conversational frameworks, and I write conversational frameworks all the time. And so conversational frameworks allow you to achieve an outcome, but they're not a script. So it gives you a structure to follow, but it also gives you flexibility within that structure to use your own language and to respond depending on how the other person reacts to your words. Okay, so frameworks versus scripts, very important. And the third key is to prepare for that conversation. And you prepare in a couple of ways. You prepare with the words that you want to say and the points you want to raise, but you also prepare emotionally. You prepare for the emotions that might come up for you. If someone says something that's a bit nasty, that might trigger a response in you. If you need to prepare for the other person's emotions as well, so you don't inadvertently create a reaction in them that's undesirable. So it's really important to understand what emotions might come up for you as well as for them, and to prepare for that. Equally, other forms of preparation might include when you're going to have the conversation. Friday at 5 o'clock might not be the best time. Where are you going to have the conversation? Does anyone else need to be there? Are there any other considerations or resources you need to have on hand while you have that conversation? So just remember, if you're going to have high quality leadership conversations, and all of us need to have these three conversations in our toolkit, you need to A, know your objective, B, have a framework to follow, and C, plan. And planning is the thing that's most often overlooked. I remember some years ago, I was working with someone and I needed to have a necessary conversation. And thankfully, I'd been able to plan what emotions might come up for me and for them. And this was a necessary conversation, as I said, so I needed to address some things. And this particular person reacted in a way that was a bit hurtful, and she said some things to me that A, were untrue, B, loaded with emotion, and C, really designed to hurt. But I'd anticipated those hurts, and in my pocket, I'd had a post-it note, and in the post-it note, I'd written a note to myself, don't take the bait. So as this conversation's going, and as she's laying into me, I had this little post-it note between my thumb and my forefinger, and I was just going, okay, this is my cue to remember not to take the bait. And don't take the bait, Jesse. And then once I didn't take the bait, the conversation settled down and we got to the outcome. So always prepare. It's the most overlooked part of those three criteria. Culture is one of those things that it's hard to describe, but you can feel it. And I remember many years ago, I took over our first practice from my wife. And at that particular time, the team were uniquely loyal to my wife. Now, my wife is awesome and wonderful, and I love her to pieces, and so did the team. But they didn't love me so much. And I remember on the first day I got there, I hadn't really met anyone. The associate dentist said in front of the whole team, Jesse, I just need you to know that I'm not going to respect you like I respect Miranda. And I remember thinking like, wow, that's a really unusual and interesting thing to say. So when she said that, I was a bit hurt. I was a bit embarrassed. I felt a bit humiliated. And outwardly I said, it's important that respect is earned, and I hope to have the opportunity to earn everyone's respect here. Inwardly, though, I was thinking to myself, this person has to go. I cannot work with this person if this is how they're going to approach me on day one. And what was really interesting is over a period of time, we went through a lot of team turnover. And it was really sad and difficult. And I was starting to question myself and doubt my abilities. And I'd come from the Navy and I thought I'd done a pretty good job there. But in this private practice environment, I was floundering. And it was to the point where Miranda was saying, well, Jesse, you are the common denominator here. And what ended up happening is we had all these people coming and going. And I remember we had to negotiate an enterprise agreement with my lawyer. It's a thing we did to document our standard terms of employment. Anyway, part of that involved the lawyer coming to interact with the team. And it was only when our lawyer, John, came to the practice and pulled me aside later and said, who on earth are these people and why on earth do you employ them? They're horrible. And it was only then that I started to feel a bit better about myself and go, yeah, maybe it's not me. And it's really interesting because the culture wasn't right and we'll try to rebuild it. But it was like every time you got one good person, the bad apples would poison that good person. They'd either leave or become a bad apple themselves. And so We really needed to work our way through replacing the team. And I remember at one point, the best man for my wedding, Phil, who's also a dentist, would ring me and he'd say, yeah, Jesse, I've had such a terrible day at the practice. It's been really tough, but I know no matter how bad my day's been, yours would have been infinitely worse. Can you please cheer me up? I'm going like, thanks so much, mate. I really appreciate that. And so over time, we managed to really redefine the culture. We had to redefine the culture from a culture that would suit Miranda's operating style to my operating style. And so that meant that over time, we replaced every single person on that team. And it took a while for us to get the critical mass of good apples so that eventually the bad apples weeded themselves out. So if you're going through a process of team transition, just understand that's normal. And from time to time, we all go through that. And I'd encourage you to hang in there. There's a real challenge though sometimes when you get a person on your team who's actually pretty good at their role. They perform their tasks well, but they're not great culture fits. They kind of bust your chops. Their behaviors aren't in alignment with your core values, and they're the ones you lose sleep over. And the reason you lose sleep over them is because if they leave the practice, you know that it's going to be an impact in terms of performance. Maybe it comes in the form of a dip in revenue. Maybe it comes in the form of key person risk and them taking the corporate knowledge out the door. But the question you've got to ask yourself is, what's it costing you if they stay? And so we call those people C players because on our performance culture matrix, they are high performers, but a poor culture fit. An A player is someone who's a high performer and a great culture fit. A B player is someone who's a culture fit but needs some training and development to perform better. And a D player is neither a culture fit nor a great performer. But C players, they're the ones that really cause us to lose sleep. And I used to be much more optimistic and think that C players could become A players. If we spoke to them and guided them and coached them and prodded them, pleaded with them almost, they would get on board with the culture. Now, I've become less optimistic about that as time goes by. So my thought for you is this, is understand what that's costing you. Sometimes you might need to wear a little bit of short-term pain in order to get a long-term gain. And if you're dealing with a C player, again, talk to the relevant people who advise you, your HR people, make sure you do everything by the book. But maybe it's time for them to find a role other than your practice. So that's all I really want to say on that. Culture is something that needs to be protected, and don't let anyone come into your garden and ruin your soil that you've worked so hard to create. Don't let anyone walk into your garden and ruin the soil that you've worked so hard to create. Don't let anyone ruin your culture. That's like walking into someone's garden and having a giant poo right in the middle of the garden. It's not cool. And so people come to work and try to do that on a routine basis, and you can't allow it. Get them out, is my view. All right, so like I said before, culture is almost like the air we breathe. We can't see it, but we know it's essential for life. And when it's good and you know when it's not, but sometimes it's a little bit hard to put your finger on. But if you understand the ingredients that make up culture, then you can create it by design. And then once you've created it, your job is to protect it at all costs. And when you protect it as the guardian of the culture with those leadership conversations and sometimes making some tough decisions if you need to, then I promise you your practice will thrive, your team will grow, and that gives you much better leverage as you grow and scale your practice. All right, team, so that's it for this week. Next week, I'm going to show you where most practice owners are getting it wrong. And I'm going to show you a system that's actually relatively boring, but it's going to make sure you hit your numbers like a metronome, week in, week out, month in, month out, quarter in, quarter out. If you get this right, your financial future is assured. If you get it wrong, you're going to be forever riding the roller coaster of money. And that is not just a roller coaster of money, it's a roller coaster of emotions, and nobody likes that. So tune in next week. I'm going to show you how to put your financial well-being on autopilot and make sure you hit your goals automatically. See you next week. Hey everyone, it's Jesse here. I hope you enjoyed that episode of the podcast. If you're looking for some more tools, some more insights, some more inspiration to help you create a practice that you love, as well as a life that you love, well, head across to savvydentist.com and check out all the goodies that we have there waiting for you right now.